folks who gets their names changed. One of the famous ones is Saul. He gets his name changed to Paul. On Friday night there was a bit of a revelation going on, because seemingly the Lord's never told me, but seemingly my name's been changed from Willie to Gordon. Who knows? There we go. Just shows you. But one Sunday morning, a pastor got up onto the pulpit and apologised for the plaster or band-aid on his face. He said this: I was thinking about my sermon when I was shaving and cut my face. Afterward, he found a note in the collection plate, and the note simply said, next time, think about your face and cut the sermon. I hope that doesn't happen this morning. In one sense, we're going to look at the book of Daniel. And in one sense, there are two different kinds of golfers. The first one, he gets his clubs, jumps in his car, goes to the course, grabs his clubs out of the boot and goes straight onto the golf course, sets up his ball in the tee, whacks it, and goes straight into the winds. And then he spends the next hour searching for the ball. Then there's the other lad who drives up to the golf course, again takes his clubs out, goes onto the practice green and has a few shots just to get warmed up, a good practice. And then he goes on to the tee, hits his first shot, bang, straight down the middle. The difference there is, one spent the time practicing. One spent the time practicing. I'm hoping over the past week that I have put in the work so that I'll be able to do this passage justice and I don't hit it into the winds. We're looking at Daniel 7 and onwards. And boy, this is a scary passage. This is a really, really scary passage. And one of the things I've noticed over the years and listening to different preachers is that with Daniel and the book of Revelation, the second half of Daniel and the book of Revelation, they are closely linked. Not only that, but you hear so many different crazy interpretations of these two books. When I started looking into it, and it might just be me, but for me, it does seem really, really simple. Because as hopefully we'll find out, both Daniel and Revelation point to one person. And of course, that person is Jesus Christ himself. You might ask how I come to that conclusion. Again, it's quite simple if we read God's word. The very first sentence in Revelation tells us. Just a few words. And it says this: the revelation of Jesus Christ. The revelation of Jesus Christ. So as an introduction in the book of Revelation, we see these words and it tells us what the whole book is about. It's all pointing to Jesus. And I think if we keep our radar fixed on that, both going through Daniel and going through Revelation and going through life, if we keep our radar fixed on Christ, then we can't go wrong. Jesus should be our central focus. And as I said, if he's the central focus, then we won't go far wrong. I think I said this week, but there is two differences in this book of Daniel. There is a split, and we see the split in chapter 7. It goes from chapter 1 to chapter 6, which, according to scholars and others, it can be classed as the historical part of the book. In other words, as you know, what happened in the past. And then from chapter 7 to chapter 12, it is prophetic, or some would class it as futuristic. The other difference, I think, that I noticed in these two sections is that the first half is written in the third person. And then if we come on from chapter 7 onwards, then we see it is written in the first person. We see with this Daniel using the word I quite a lot. In other words, he was witness to this. And yet, as I said, although there is a difference, there is also similarities. And one of the similarities is from the outset of Daniel, we see Jesus right through this beautiful book. I think people, or maybe ministers or Bible study leaders or whoever it might be, they actually complicate this. And I'm sure, like me, if you've been around the church for a while, then you would see complicated charts, complicated pictures, trying to reveal or explain away the second half of not only Daniel, but Revelation as well. I asked the question, and as I was looking at this, I asked the question, if it was so complicated, why does God not explain it? Why does not God not explain it? It's there in black and white, it's simple. And God, he reveals it in a simple manner, not by charts, not by different languages, not by different pictures, just in black and white, so that we can read into it and see it. And actually, one of the most important things, and especially possibly in the day in which we live, one of the themes that's running through this whole book, and what the book is saying to you and to me, is that God is in control. Way back there in Daniel, he was in control. Guess what? He's in control in the here and now. And even more assuring, he is in control of the future. Historically, he was in control. In the moment of time, he's in control. And then in the future, God is still in control. He is sovereign. And he's got my future sorted. He's got your future sorted. And he's got the world's future sorted. I was listening to a commentator, and I thought what he said about Daniel was quite interesting, because he said that if a good experiment would be to read this book of Daniel to your children or your grandchildren and simply ask them what it means and give them the freedom to explain what it means. And now you're saying to yourself, Willie, you've really lost the plot, because I can't understand it, so how's my grandchildren going to understand it? I'll tell you why. The generations that are upcoming learn very much in a visual world. With all the different social media available and all the different computer games that simply confuse me, and yet they can see and process information in a different way from myself. They process information through pictures, visually, through computer games. And they would say this, oh, there's a monster. What's it doing? Oh, there's another monster. How does that one fit in? And there's a monster with a wee horn. Where does that come in? And then quickly, before you realise it, they've come up with the whole answer, simply by looking at the pictures in Daniel. A good experiment to try. And if they do come up with the answer, then you can say to your grandchild, go and tell our pastor, because he's not got a clue. Another story. As I said, this is a type of apocalyptic writing or literature. The word for revelation in the Greek comes from apocalypto, and that comes from apo, from calypto, which means cover, which literally means to remove the cover from something, to uncover something. And God has uncovered what's going to happen in the future, so that you and I can understand what's going to happen. So hopefully, as we go through this prophetic part of Daniel, we will be able to uncover what will happen in a day to come. As I said, if we actually look at Daniel's reactions, and I think this is the first thing we need to realize. If we look at Daniel's reactions, then we'll see that this wasn't an easy thing. This wasn't a light thing. Verse 15, it says, as for me, Daniel, my spirit with me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. Verse 28 says, here is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly alarmed me, and my colour changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. That's somebody that's scared. That's somebody who has saw these visions and has went pale-faced with fright. He's actually realized, Daniel has actually saw into the future and says, this ain't good. This ain't good. It's going to be pretty bleak. It's going to be pretty bad. Hence why his face turned so pale. And he wanted to keep it to himself. Sadly, when we think about the conflict with those who are part of the anti-God movement, those who are against God, then even today we can see how scary this is. I don't need to tell you. You know it yourself. When you read the newspapers or look at the television and you see some of the atrocities that are going on at the moment. We are certainly living in the last days. If we read verse 25, it says this: change the times and the law. Someone changes the times and changes the law. Again, we don't need to look far, do we, to see how the laws are being changed. The laws that our country was built on, the laws of God that our country was built on, and what they're trying to do, they're trying to change it. And when I was thinking about change the time, then my mind went to the leader of North Korea, because they have actually physically changed the time. In North Korea, it's not known as 2025. It's known something like 113. They have actually even changed the time. The government has changed it into their own time zone. Now, please don't understand me. I'm not saying that North Korea is here in Daniel 7. All I'm saying is to give you an example how Daniel is coming true. With the laws getting changed, with the time zones getting changed, etc. In the first year of the reign of King of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in bed. He wrote down the dream and told the sum of the matter. This is probably 14 years prior to the demise of Nebuchadnezzar. It just doesn't come after chapter 6 as we see it. Because if we look at it at the beginning in chapter 1 or chapter 1 it would say, it says the exact same words. It says in the first year of King of Babylon. So this doesn't happen as Nebuchadnezzar dies and Darius comes to the throne. You go back to the beginning of Daniel and you see this is probably where chapter 7 fits in. I feel personally, and there are a lot of different opinions on this, but personally I feel that chapter 7 and chapter 2 are very linked closely. If you remember when we were going through chapter 2, then I did say we wouldn't speak about the different dreams. We'll look at that later. And this is one of the reasons why. Because Daniel 7 and Daniel 2, I feel, are linked. But the first thing that I noticed was the four winds. The four winds. So let's look at verse 2 where it speaks about the four winds of heaven. Again, I would say that these four winds come from the north, south, east, and west. I'm sure there are lots and lots of different types of winds. But you notice that these winds come from heaven. And we don't say much about that. But one thing that I would like to say about these four winds and the fact that it's coming from north, south, east, and west, is it speaks about the global aspect of it. It's coming from every single part of the globe. If we look at Revelation, I think it's chapter 7 and verse 1, I think it is, then this would substantiate what we're reading here. Because it says, after this I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on earth or sea or against any tree. So whatever is happening at this point with these 4 winds that's getting roused up, they're going to be let loose. These 4 winds are going to be let loose by the angel. They're not going to be held back anymore. And what happens when these winds are loosed? Well, we see that it stirs up the great sea. In the scriptures, the sea can often symbolize chaos. It can symbolize danger and also the unknown. It speaks about peoples or humanity, and actually how the Lord has let these winds loose and stirred up chaos. Only at God's request. Again, we don't need to look far, do we, to see the chaos that the world is in. We don't need to look far to see how the wind has stirred up chaos. I'm sure you're like me, and after a storm or after high winds and huge waves, you go down to the shore and you see the mess. Why? Because the sea and the winds have stirred it up and made it chaotic. Even globally, as I said, there is chaos. Even personally, there can be chaos. And that's sad. This chaos, one commentator said, is representative of the sin of humanity. Sinners, the wicked, are like the mess of all the beasts arise from its wickedness. They are in a chaotic state. They don't know whether they're coming or going. They don't know where to turn. There is only one place that they can turn, and that's Jesus, who calms the storm. Who calms the storm. What did he say when he was in the boat alongside the disciples? What did he say to the wind and the sea? Just be still. Just be still. And as he said it, the seas were calm. You know, both you and me, Jesus needs us to speak these words, be still, be calm. And it can bring peace into our chaotic existence. What was it the disciples said? They said, "What manner of man is this, that even the winds and the waves obey him?" You see, God is sovereign. God has complete and utter control. No matter what man thinks, no matter what men try to do, God is still in control in 2025. And he's still going to be in control in 30,025 or whatever it is. In other words, the future, he's still going to be in control. When we see these beasts coming out of the sea, we see that God didn't say, oh dearie me, look what's happening now. No only has winds came, but blowing, there's 3 beasts or 4 beasts came up. What on earth am I going to do? No, God didn't say that at all. God knew it was going to happen. God knew it was going to happen. He wasn't taken by surprise. If we go way back to the Garden of Eden, he wasn't surprised at man's sin. The plan of salvation was already written. But we see these 4 beasts coming out of this chaos. And we see the description of it. But I think we need to be constantly, and remember, when we think about Russia, when we think about Israel, when we think about Palestine, when we think about Iran, and many, many other places, guess what? God isn't surprised. We might be surprised. But God isn't surprised because he knows what's going on. He knows what's going to happen. He has a plan for everything. The mess that I make in my life, God's not surprised. God knows. He knows what I'm like. He knows how he can bring peace in the chaos. It doesn't surprise him at all. It might seem it like times that things are out of control. But one thing we need to be reassured of, and one thing we need to always be keep in mind of, is the fact that in the chaos, God is there. The 4 beasts. We see the 4 beasts arose from the chaos that had been churned up from the seas by the winds. It says that they represented the kings of 4 nations. And again, we can see if we're correct about the thinking of chapter 2. We think about the 4 empires of that time: Babylonia, Media, Persia, and the Greek and Roman Empire. Again, not everybody would agree with this, but that's okay. But was it that these 4 beasts were represented of these 4 nations? We see the different descriptions of the beasts and how it was a bear and different things like that, an eagle, a leopard. If you think about some of the nations today, an example is Russia and their emblems, a bear. America and the eagle. Although it is a good job that Benjamin Franklin didn't get his way, because he wanted to change the nation's emblem to be a turkey. We'll not say much about that. Thankfully, he did choose the eagle. I want to leave that for a moment. Suffice to say, the leopard in verse 6, it says that dominion was given to the leopard. And again, we're coming back to this. Dominion was given to the leopard. Who gave dominion to Nebuchadnezzar? Who gave dominion to this leopard? It's God. It's God. Nobody else was given the dominion. Nobody else gave the dominion to them. It was just God. And again, we see God's sovereignty in this. Again, we see how God is still in control. And as I said, this must have been pretty bad, because Daniel is terrified when he has these dreams. The man who faced an angry king, the man who faced lions, and we see he is scared with this night vision. I think, if I be honest, and the Lord had to reveal something like this to any of us, and we saw what the future was going to be like, then we would be terrified. And we think it's bad at the moment. The sad thing is, it's just going to get a lot worse. But that would be sad, wouldn't it? If that's the end of the story. If the end of the story was just about these beasts, if the end of the story was just about the chaos that the place was in, then that would be really, really sad. What hope would there be in that? No hope whatsoever. And this is where it gets good. Because if we look at verses 13 and 14 of Daniel 7, it says, "And behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like the Son of Man, and he came to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him, and to him was given dominion and glory of a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, languages should serve him." You know, his dominion wasn't a temporary dominion. The Son of Man's dominion isn't just going to be for a season, because it tells us this. It says his dominion is an everlasting dominion, which will not pass away. And his kingdom is one that shall not be destroyed. Goes on to say, "I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one of the ancient days." You know, that whole thing is speaking about Jesus. And Jesus is going to come back to set up his kingdom. A kingdom that will reign forever and ever. A kingdom that's not going to be destroyed. A kingdom that both you and I can be part of. And the way that we're part of that, as many of us here has experienced, is just putting our trust and faith in the one who is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. That's a good ending to the story, isn't it? That one day Jesus is coming back to destroy all these things, to set up his new kingdom. If you want to find out a wee bit more about this new kingdom, then come back next week and we can tell you all about it, hopefully. Amen. We're just going to have our closing song, and when we think about the Ancient of Days, there is only one song I think we can sing, and that is the song entitled Ancient of Days. So those who are able